From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine on Wednesday night. Great topic tonight. We're talking about how prepared is Tennessee for a natural disaster. Of course, this is September 10th, one day before the anniversary of September 11th. This month is designated as Disaster Preparedness Month in Tennessee. So we want to talk about disasters in Tennessee. And when we talk about disasters, they're all manner of things that can happen, will happen, do happen, might happen, all kinds of things we need to be thinking about. And we're happy to have with us Dean Fleaner from TEMA. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ben. Glad to be here.
Appreciate it very much. So when we're talking disaster preparedness, a lot of people think about, they may think about the terrorist attack, they may think about the natural disaster, but there's a lot of other stuff even that you're thinking about, right?
We think about earthquakes, we think about tornadoes, flash floods, your regular run-of-the-mill floods that just kind of you can see coming and you need to get away from. We also think about things like infectious diseases that could be, out there and what we need to do about that. Our job at TEMA is to protect lives and property in a disaster.
And to think about what is the worst thing that could happen, and then how do we deal with that?
That's exactly right, and that's what we do every day.
And when you're thinking about, it seems like medical stuff has been in the news more. We've certainly seen Ebola in Africa, and in the Midwest there's some virus now, and we'll talk more about the specifics of that later. But you're thinking about medical emergencies as well, right?
We do. We have part of our planning. We have a very large document that's called the Tennessee Emergency Management Plan, and that tells us how we are going to respond and activate in any given hazard. And it's an all hazards plan, and we have different annexes to that plan that deal with specific catastrophes. One is earthquake. We have a catastrophic earthquake annex. We also have a pandemic planning section to the Tennessee Emergency Management Plan. So it is that all hazards, and every year we go through a process at the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency of looking at the current hazards and threats in Tennessee. What is our current posture to addressing those? What gaps do we have? What do we need to fill in case this scenario or that scenario happens related to that disaster? And then we plan from there, and we are always, if anything, planning for the next disaster in Tennessee. And that's kind of the goal of Preparedness Month, is getting people to think of that.
Get people to think about it. Get your head around it. What's the largest disaster in our state's history?
The May 2010 floods.
So that trumps every other disaster across the whole state.
Across the whole state, that was 49 counties. It was a $500 million disaster. And we still, to this day, we work on projects that came out of that flood in terms of helping counties who are still rebuilding from that, who are still looking for reimbursement for projects that they're working on as a result of that flood. So largest in the state's history.
And how disaster prone is Tennessee? How often do we get presidential declarations or whatever would be rise to the level of what might be defined as a disaster?
Well, in 2011 we had 5 presidential disasters declared in the state, and we led the nation in presidential disaster declarations. The past 4 years have been a little bit more quiet in terms of something rising to the level of where it's presidentially declared, and we are getting resources from the federal government in terms of assistance to governments to rebuild, or assistance to individuals to rebuild their lives. In 2013 we had about 10 states of emergency, which isn't exactly the disaster declaration, but that's where we've had severe weather. We've had ice storms, we've had tornadoes, we've had severe weather that has come in and caused us to say this is going to be very serious for this part of the state, or through the state overall, like with ice storms and winter weather, and we need to activate, get our resources in here, our people in here to be ready to respond if a county asks us for assistance because their ability to take care of the disaster has gone beyond their capacity.
What disaster worries you, TEMA, the most? Is there one that's just, this would be the worst possible situation?
It would be a large magnitude earthquake all along the New Madrid fault line just west of Memphis, Tennessee.
And we've talked about that on this show,
yeah.
And we've talked about it with TEMA, and it's something it's going to happen.
It is not a matter of if but when. And that is like I say, we have a whole annex to our plan just to deal with that, just to deal with a catastrophic earthquake.
What do you mean an annex? What does that mean?
That's just kind of a separate section, its own special separate section in the plan that deals just with that topic. What are the resources? What is the potential impact? What are the gaps that you have to address that? Where are you going to go to get resources to fill those gaps? And it is basically an analysis of here's how catastrophic it would be. This is what we're going to do to respond, and this is where we're going to go to get resources if we don't have them.
And what would it look like? You say that's your worst case scenario. What would it mean for those of us here in Middle Tennessee if there were over there around Memphis, New Madrid Fault, this catastrophic quake?
Well, we would probably see in Nashville and Middle Tennessee, we would definitely feel it. And we would probably see, older structures, brick and mortar, they may have some of their walls fall, and there may be glass breaking. Now, over in Memphis and that part of Tennessee, we're probably looking at many thousands of individuals who are going to be seeking shelter. Our estimates say 1,300 people killed.
1,300 people killed.
1,300 people killed, and that's an estimate based on 2003 population data, back when we had only about 5.3 million in the state of Tennessee. Now we have about 6.6 million, so there will probably be a few more. Our estimates also say the number of people seeking shelters, we would need about 21 facilities the size of the Pentagon in order to shelter that many people who might be seeking it eventually. And you have to remember, it's not just Tennessee, but it's the 8 states that surround that New Madrid fault line, from Kentucky over to Arkansas, Missouri, down into Mississippi. They're all going to feel it. They're all going to be impacted. So
would we be the most impacted, though? You say there are all these states, but what about us?
We would be the most impacted because of the population in Memphis and in West Tennessee. The millions of people that live over there would be most severely impacted. But a catastrophic earthquake like that is going to change our national dynamic because of the magnitude of it, the impact of it. If you think of just the oil and gas and commodities that traverse across the Mississippi River in pipelines, and then that come down the Mississippi River, you have a river system there from New Orleans up to Baton Rouge that is probably the largest in the world besides the Netherlands or somewhere over there. It's a very, very large transportation, logistics, commodity system. That's going to be impacted. All of the distribution facilities you have in Memphis, we are all used in business now. It's all about on-time delivery. We don't keep inventory anymore. We're used to getting it overnighted. I can have it the very next day. That's going to be impacted. If it happens to be wintertime and it's very, very, very cold in the northeast of the United States, and we have an earthquake and it breaks those natural gas pipelines that go across the Mississippi River, there's not going to be heat for the northeast. So that's why I say yes, Tennessee is going to be severely impacted, but it is going to be a nationwide event to have a 7.0 magnitude or higher earthquake.
That's the threshold, 7.0 magnitude.
About 7.0, and we know that because it's happened before. It happened in 1811 and 1812 when the New Madrid fault line broke then and created Reelfoot Lake over in West Tennessee. You've probably heard stories about ringing church bells in Boston, felt all the way up into Canada. Yeah,
and the ground turned to sand.
The ground turned to sand, and there was lightning. You can go back and read shaker journals from that time period that talk about the ground shaking, lightning coming up from the ground, boiling water, and all those things that went on. And the difference between then and now is there's a whole lot more people living over there. So.
And this is not just about earthquakes. It's about disaster preparedness. But that's the penultimate possible disaster for our state. Is Memphis? I mean, you hear out in L.A. they build for it. The buildings sway. They have this kind of natural propensity to kind of handle some of this stuff. What about us?
Yeah, we do a lot. Memphis, the city, that part of the state has gone through a lot of retrofitting bridges, retrofitting buildings to be able to handle a large magnitude earthquake. The difference is in the geology. California, LA, San Francisco, that's all just bedrock, just, a little bit beneath the surface. So when they build down in that nice, solid, strong bedrock. So earthquakes there, while they may be high intensity, they don't travel very far. You look at the 6.0 in Napa Valley. I mean, that was bad. That was a bad earthquake, and it knocked some bricks off of some buildings, it broke windows and things like that. But it wasn't felt very far. Now, in this part of the country, we have a lot of sediment, and it would be just like basically you pour water into a bucket of sand and you shake it up, and that's what's gonna happen in West Tennessee. It's called liquefaction. The ground basically turns to water, and that causes earthquake tremors to go farther underground or farther across. It causes the intensity to be a lot higher. That's why you can feel it up in Boston. And so that's basically, it's all in that geology and how it will impact if it does happen.
It's a fascinating discussion. All right, we want to ask you to call in. If you want to call in, there's the number 737 plus 737 7587, talking about disasters in Tennessee. How prepared are we? What do we need to do to prepare? Maybe you could talk about a disaster you personally have been involved in, and what would you have liked to have done differently. So we'll be back right after this.